The mansion stood like a masterpiece at the edge of the city. Tall glass walls reflecting the sky, polished floors that shimmered under soft lights, and silence that felt heavier than stone. To anyone passing by, it was a symbol of success, power, and perfection. But inside, it told a different story. Every night and every day, the cries echoed. Sharp, unrelenting, exhausting. Damien Cole had built everything from nothing. His name carried weight in boardrooms, his decisions moved markets, and his wealth placed him among the most powerful men in the country. Yet none of that mattered when he stood outside the nursery door, listening to the sound he had come to dread. His twin daughters, Lila and Nora, would not stop crying. It had been months. Since the day they were born, the same day their mother took her last breath, the house had not known peace. At first, people said it was normal. Babies cried. It would pass. But it didn't. The crying only grew worse. They refused to feed properly. They barely slept. Their tiny hands would stretch into the air, as if reaching for something, or someone, who wasn't there. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between cries, they would stare blankly into empty space, their eyes unfocused, distant. It unsettled everyone. Damien had done everything he knew how to do. He had spent money. The best pediatricians were flown in from different countries. Specialists ran tests, scans, and assessments that cost more than most people earned in a year. Each one left with the same conclusion. There's nothing physically wrong with them. The words meant nothing to him anymore. If nothing was wrong, why were his daughters suffering? Next came the nannies, highly trained professionals with years of experience, gentle voices, careful hands, perfect resumes. One after another they arrived with confidence, and left with exhaustion. Others barely made it through a few days. They don't respond, one nanny had whispered before quitting. It's like they're looking for something we can't give them. Soon, the staff began to talk. Quiet conversations in corners. Nervous glances toward the nursery. Some refused to work night shifts. Others left altogether. The mansion, once alive with activity, began to feel hollow. And Damien began to fall apart in ways no one expected. He missed meetings, ignored calls, deals slipped through his fingers. Partners grew impatient. Rumors spread, whispers that the great Damien Cole was losing control. But none of it mattered. Not when his daughters were still crying. One evening, after another failed attempt to calm them, Damien sat alone in his study. The sound carried through the walls, piercing everything. He stared at the glass in his hand, untouched, and made a decision. If the best in the world couldn't help him, then he would find someone who could, no matter who they were. The next morning, a public offer went out. The pay was outrageous. The requirements were simple. Take care of the twins. Applications flooded in. Most were the same, experienced, polished, predictable, until one stood out. She arrived without urgency, without nerves, a woman named Mara, simple, composed, and accompanied by a little girl. Damien noticed that first. "You brought your child?" he asked, his voice edged with impatience. Mara nodded. "I didn't have anyone to leave her with." The girl stood quietly beside her, observing everything with calm curiosity. Her name was Sofi. There was something unusual about her. Not loud, not overly cheerful, just present. Damien almost dismissed them immediately. This was not a place for distractions, not a place for children. But something made him pause. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was desperation. "Fine," he said at last. "You can stay." As they walked through the mansion, the cries began again. Loud, sharp, familiar. Mara continued listening as Damien spoke, but Sofi stopped walking. Her head tilted slightly. She listened more carefully. Then, without asking, she moved. Step by step, she followed the sound down the long hallway, past the polished doors, until she reached the nursery. She pushed it open gently. Inside, Lila and Nora lay in their cribs, faces wet with tears, small bodies tense with distress. Their cries filled the room, bouncing off the walls. Sofi didn't rush. She didn't panic. She walked closer, slowly, as if she understood something no one else did. For a moment, she simply stood there, watching them. Then she spoke, softly, gently, words no one else could hear clearly. Something changed. At first it was subtle. The crying weakened, then paused, then stopped. Silence filled the room. One of the twins blinked, her breathing steadying. The other turned her head toward Sofi, her tiny hand reaching out. And then a sound no one in that house had heard in months. A laugh, soft at first, then another, and another. Within seconds, the room that had been filled with pain now echoed with joy. Down the hallway, Damien froze. He knew that sound. But it couldn't be. He moved quickly, almost running, his heart pounding as he reached the nursery door. And there he saw it, Lila and Nora, smiling, reaching, laughing, and Sofi, standing between them, gently holding their hands. Damien didn't speak. He couldn't. For the first time in months, his daughters looked alive. Behind him, Mara stood quietly, her expression calm, as though this moment was not surprising. Damien stepped closer, his eyes never leaving the scene. "How?" he whispered. No one answered. In the days that followed, everything began to change. The crying didn't return the way it used to. There were still moments, small ones, but nothing like before. The twins started feeding better, sleeping longer, responding to voices. But more than anything, they responded to Sofi. She spent hours with them, not as a caretaker, not as someone trained, but simply as someone who cared. She talked to them, sat in silence with them when needed, and they listened. Damien watched it all, at first from a distance. He had spent so long trying to fix the problem that he never thought to simply understand it. One evening, he found himself standing at the nursery door again. But this time, there were no cries, only soft laughter. He stepped inside slowly. Sofi looked up at him, then back at the twins. "They just wanted someone," she said simply. Damien frowned slightly. "Someone?" he asked. She nodded. They felt alone. The words settled deeper than he expected. Alone. He looked at his daughters, at their small faces, now peaceful, at the space beside them that had once been filled by someone who would never return. And for the first time, he understood. It wasn't something money could fix. It wasn't something experts could diagnose. It was something he had overlooked completely. Connection, presence, love. The next morning, Damien found Mara in the kitchen. "I want you to stay," he said. She looked at him, waiting. "Not as staff," he added, "as part of this home." Mara didn't respond immediately. But Sofi, standing nearby, smiled, and that was enough. Days turned into weeks. The mansion changed. The silence was no longer heavy. The halls no longer felt empty. Laughter replaced tension. Warmth replaced distance. And Damien, he changed too. He spent more time in the nursery, learned how to hold his daughters without fear. How to sit with them, not as a problem to solve, but as a father who was finally present. The glass house still stood tall, still reflected the sky. But inside, it was no longer just a symbol of wealth. It was a home. And for the first time since everything had fallen apart, it felt whole again. Because in the end, it wasn't power or money that brought peace back into those walls. It was something far simpler and far more powerful.